People say you discover who your real family is after someone dies. I used to think that was just another saying people repeated to comfort themselves. I don't believe that anymore. Because 20 minutes after my mother's funeral ended, my brother-in-law stood in front of everyone we loved and announced that my mother had chosen my sister over me. Not quietly, not privately. He made sure every single person in the room heard him. And by the time he finished speaking, half my family looked at me as though I had already lost everything. What none of them knew was that my mother had spent the last 3 years preparing for that exact moment. My name is Claire Morgan. I'm 31 years old. I work as a certified public accountant for a manufacturing company outside Columbus, Ohio. My life isn't exciting. I don't own a luxury car. I don't have a huge house. Most weekends, you'll find me grocery shopping, reading mystery novels, or helping neighbors file their taxes. I've never wanted attention. I always believed quiet lives could still be meaningful. That belief came from my mother, Margaret Morgan. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday without writing it down. She baked 2 extra pies every Thanksgiving because she knew someone unexpected always showed up. She volunteered at the public library every Tuesday afternoon for nearly 20 years. People often called her ordinary, but to me, she was extraordinary because she made everyone around her feel important. When doctors found pancreatic cancer, everything changed in a single afternoon. Stage 4, already spreading. The specialist tried explaining treatment options. Mom listened politely, then asked only one question. How much good time do I have? The doctor hesitated. If treatment responds well, perhaps 18 months. She nodded once. That's enough. No tears, no panic, just acceptance. On the drive home, she rolled the car windows down. The cool autumn air filled the silence. Finally, she smiled at me. You know what's funny? What? I suddenly care a lot less about dusty furniture. I laughed despite everything. That was Mom. Even facing death, she found a way to make someone else smile. My older sister, Olivia, lived only 30 minutes away. When Mom received her diagnosis, I thought we'd face everything together. Instead, our lives slowly moved in opposite directions. Olivia visited often during the first month. She brought flowers, fancy meals from expensive restaurants, beautiful blankets Mom never used. Then her visits became shorter. Work was busy, vacation plans, dinner parties. Eventually, she mostly called instead. Her husband, Nathan Brooks, always had an explanation. Olivia has so much on her plate. We're closing another property. The market's crazy. You understand. I did understand. At least I thought I did. Nathan was successful. At least that's how everyone described him. Luxury real estate investor, expensive watches, imported suits, country club membership. He drove different cars every year. People admired confidence. Nathan had enough confidence for 10 people. Sometimes, I wondered if confidence and kindness had simply never met each other. Mom never criticized him, not once. Even after he began making comments that sounded harmless, until you listened carefully. Claire's always been the emotional one. You should let Olivia handle financial decisions. You've done enough visiting. Don't burn yourself out. Each sentence sounded caring, until you realized every one of them encouraged me to spend less time with my own mother. I ignored him. Every evening after work, I'd stop by Mom's house. Some nights we watched old movies. Sometimes we worked crossword puzzles. On difficult days, I'd simply sit beside her while she slept. She hated hospitals, so I learned how to change dressings, organize medications, cook meals she could actually keep down. I wasn't heroic. I was just her daughter. One rainy afternoon, about 6 months before she passed away, I found her sitting alone on the back porch wrapped in a quilt. She stared across the garden Dad had planted before he died. Most of the flowers had already faded for winter. She patted the chair beside her. Sit. I joined her. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, she asked, Claire, do you know what the hardest part about getting sick is? I assumed she'd say pain or fear. Instead, she surprised me. Watching people become who they really are. I frowned. What do you mean? She smiled sadly. Illness removes convenience. Some people stay, some people leave, and some, she looked toward the empty driveway, only visit when it's easy. I wanted to defend Olivia. She's busy, Mom nodded. I know, but something in her voice told me she wasn't talking about schedules. She was talking about priorities. 3 months later, Nathan began asking unusual questions. At first, they sounded innocent. So, has Margaret talked about the house? No. What about retirement accounts? I don't know. Did she ever update her will? I've never asked, he smiled. You should. I remember feeling uncomfortable. Mom was still alive. Talking about inheritances felt wrong. The questions continued. Every few weeks, another casual conversation, another hint, another suggestion. Old wills become outdated. Families should avoid legal confusion. Properties need proper planning. One evening, Mom overheard him talking. After he left, she quietly asked, "What exactly did Nathan want today?" I told her. She became unusually quiet, then changed the subject. At the time, I didn't understand why. Winter arrived. Mom grew weaker. Walking from the bedroom to the kitchen exhausted her. Some mornings, she apologized for needing help. I always gave the same answer. You changed my diapers. I think we're even. She laughed every single time. One Sunday afternoon, she asked me to drive her downtown. I need to see someone. Who? David Harper, our family attorney. He'd known my parents for nearly 30 years. I waited in the lobby while they met privately. Nearly 2 hours passed. When Mom finally came out, she looked strangely peaceful, almost relieved. I asked what they'd discussed. She smiled. Old paperwork, nothing more. I didn't push. Looking back, that meeting changed everything. I just didn't know it yet. 3 weeks before Mom died, Olivia suddenly started visiting again. Almost every day, she brought groceries, helped clean, even cooked dinner once. For a little while, I convinced myself things were finally returning to normal. Maybe grief had reminded us what mattered. Maybe families really did come together in difficult times. I wanted to believe that. Mom seemed happy too. She loved having both daughters together again. Then, one evening, I walked into the kitchen unexpectedly. Nathan was standing beside Mom. He didn't realize I had entered. He was speaking softly. If there's anything unfinished, I can help organize the legal side. Mom looked directly at him. No, thank you. I've already taken care of everything. He smiled politely. I only meant, I know exactly what you meant. Her voice remained gentle. But everything is already arranged. For a split second, Nathan's smile disappeared. Then he noticed me standing there. Immediately it returned. Later that night, I asked Mom what had happened. She simply squeezed my hand. Some conversations. Reveal more than answers ever could. Again, I didn't understand. Mom passed away on a quiet Thursday morning. The sunrise had just begun. Birds were singing outside her bedroom window. I was holding her hand. Olivia arrived 15 minutes later. She collapsed beside the bed crying. For nearly an hour, the two of us simply held each other. No arguments, no resentment, just two daughters saying goodbye. For a moment, I thought love had won. The funeral took place 4 days later. The church overflowed with people. Teachers, neighbors, veterans who remembered Dad. Children Mom had once read stories to at the library. Even the mayor attended. The pastor smiled while speaking. Margaret measured wealth differently. She believed kindness collected interest. People laughed softly through tears. It was exactly the service she deserved. Afterward, everyone gathered in the church fellowship hall. Coffee, sandwiches, old photographs displayed on memory boards. People shared stories. For almost an hour, the room felt warm, comforting, until Nathan quietly clinked his coffee spoon against a glass. The sound echoed across the room. Conversations stopped. Every eye turned toward him. He smiled confidently. If I could have everyone's attention. Olivia looked surprised. She clearly hadn't expected this. Neither had I. Nathan placed one hand around Olivia's shoulder. I know today's emotional, so I'll keep this brief. He looked around the room dramatically. Margaret wanted everything settled peacefully. My stomach tightened. What was he doing? He reached into the inside pocket of his expensive blazer, removed a sealed envelope, then smiled. Before she passed, she made her wishes perfectly clear. The room became silent. Nathan slowly lifted the envelope into the air. My wife, he glanced proudly at Olivia, will be receiving responsibility for the family estate. Whispers immediately spread through the room. I stared at him, completely confused. What estate? Mom had never mentioned anything. Nathan continued speaking. It's what Margaret believed was best. Then, he looked directly at me. I'm sure Claire understands. I didn't answer, because something deep inside me felt terribly wrong. And across the room, our family attorney, David Harper, had just walked through the door. The moment he saw the envelope in Nathan's hand, his expression changed completely. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nathan still stood proudly in the middle of the fellowship hall. The envelope remained raised in his hand like some kind of trophy. Around him, people whispered quietly. I guess Margaret trusted Olivia more. Well, Claire was always emotional. Olivia does seem better with money. Every sentence felt like another stone pressing against my chest. Not because I wanted an inheritance, because people were deciding what my mother believed without ever hearing her voice. I looked toward my sister. Olivia's face had gone pale. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't celebrating. She looked confused, as if Nathan had skipped an entire conversation she didn't know existed. I caught her eye. She gave me a tiny shake of her head, almost invisible, as though she were silently saying, I didn't know he was going to do this. I believed her, at least in that moment. Nathan cleared his throat dramatically. I know emotions are running high, but Margaret wanted to prevent future disagreements. He tapped the envelope. This contains everything. Someone from the back asked, So the estate's already settled? Nathan smiled confidently. Essentially, it was Margaret's wish. Again, he looked directly at me. I hope everyone respects that. Before I could respond, another voice interrupted. I'm afraid. That's impossible. The room turned. David Harper stood near the entrance, still wearing the dark suit he'd worn during the funeral. His leather briefcase rested beside him. His expression remained calm, but there was steel behind his eyes. Nathan forced a smile. David, I wasn't expecting you. David walked forward slowly. I can see that. Nathan folded his arms. I was simply informing the family. David nodded politely. About what? The estate. David looked at the envelope, then back at Nathan. I see. And exactly where did you get that? Nathan hesitated. It was among Margaret's personal papers. David didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward me. Then Olivia. Finally, he spoke. Interesting. Because I prepared Margaret Morgan's estate documents personally. A strange silence filled the room. Nathan's confident smile faded, only slightly. He laughed awkwardly. There must be some misunderstanding. I don't think so, David replied. I've handled Margaret's legal affairs for 28 years. I know every document she signed. Every conversation in the room stopped. Even the coffee machine suddenly seemed quiet. Nathan lifted the envelope. Well, perhaps you'd like to verify it. David smiled. I would. Nathan handed it over. David opened it carefully. Read the first page. Turned another. Then another. His face remained impossible to read. Finally, he folded the papers, placed them back inside, then looked directly at Nathan. Where exactly did you find this? Nathan answered immediately. In Margaret's desk. David nodded slowly. I see. Then he asked one question. Did Margaret ever personally give this to you? Nathan hesitated. No. Did she tell you to announce this today? No. Did she instruct you to present this document at her funeral? Nathan's jaw tightened. No. David closed the envelope. Then perhaps, today wasn't the appropriate day. Nathan's voice hardened. Are you saying this isn't legitimate? David answered carefully. I'm not discussing Margaret's estate in a church fellowship hall. The tension was almost unbearable. People glanced between both men, trying to understand what was happening. Nathan looked irritated. Everyone deserves clarity. David nodded. They'll receive it when the proper time comes. Nathan crossed his arms. So Claire already knew? Every eye turned toward me. I slowly shook my head. I know nothing. And it was true. I was just as confused as everyone else. David looked around the room. Margaret specifically instructed me that no estate discussion would happen until after all immediate family had privately met. Nathan interrupted. That wasn't in the paperwork. David looked directly into his eyes. No, it wasn't. but it was in her written legal instructions. Nathan didn't answer. For the first time, he looked uncertain. David turned toward everyone gathered. I know today has been emotionally exhausting. I respectfully ask that we allow Margaret's family time to grieve. Formal discussions will happen tomorrow morning. He smiled kindly. Thank you for coming today. People slowly began leaving. Conversations restarted. But now, everyone whispered about the strange exchange they'd just witnessed. Within 15 minutes, the fellowship hall had almost emptied. Only 4 people remained. Me, Olivia, Nathan, David. Nathan walked toward David. I don't appreciate being embarrassed. David calmly adjusted his glasses. I'm sure Margaret didn't appreciate being discussed like a financial investment. Nathan's jaw clenched. Olivia finally spoke. David, did Mom really leave instructions? He smiled gently. Yes, quite detailed ones. She looked relieved, then confused again. So, why didn't you say anything? Because your mother specifically instructed me not to. Nathan looked annoyed. This is ridiculous. David ignored him completely. Instead, he reached into his briefcase, removed a sealed cream-colored envelope. Across the front, Mom's handwriting immediately caught my attention. It simply read, "To my daughters." My heart skipped. David looked at both of us. Margaret asked me to give you this after her funeral, but only when the 2 of you were alone. Nathan reached for it. I'll take. David stepped backward. No, this isn't addressed to you. Nathan laughed sarcastically. I'm Olivia's husband. David smiled politely. And Margaret was very precise. He handed the envelope directly to Olivia. You may open it. Olivia looked at me, then carefully broke the seal. Inside, there was only one handwritten page. She unfolded it slowly. Her hands trembled. Read it, David said softly. She nodded. My beautiful girls, if you're reading this, then today has probably been difficult. I'm sorry I couldn't spare you that pain. I could already hear Mom's voice. Olivia continued. The 2 of you have always believed I couldn't tell when something was wrong. Mothers notice much more than they admit. She stopped reading, looked at me, then continued. Over the last 3 years, I've watched both of you make sacrifices, some visible, some invisible. Tears rolled down Olivia's cheeks. Mine too. Claire, thank you for giving me your evenings, your weekends, and your quiet company. You never kept score. I closed my eyes, trying not to cry. Olivia, thank you for loving me, even when life became complicated. I know your heart. Never let anyone convince you that kindness is weakness. Olivia suddenly lowered the letter. Her breathing changed. She looked toward Nathan, only for a second, then continued reading. Tomorrow, both of you will learn why I made certain decisions. Please, listen completely before reacting. Some people speak loudly, because they hope no one notices the truth. The room became silent. Nathan shifted uncomfortably. The final sentence nearly broke me. Whatever happens next, remember that I loved you equally. Always. Olivia folded the letter carefully. Neither of us spoke. David finally broke the silence. Margaret asked only one thing of me. What? I whispered. That I remind both of you. Grief makes people vulnerable. So don't let anyone rush important decisions. Nathan suddenly stood. We're leaving. Olivia looked surprised, but I said we're leaving. His voice had become noticeably sharper. She quietly stood, then looked back at me. For the first time in years, I saw guilt in her eyes. Real guilt. Not because of money, because she'd realized something. Mom had anticipated conflict. As they walked away, David quietly said, Claire. I turned. Would you stay a moment? I nodded. Nathan looked back, clearly irritated, but he continued walking. Once they disappeared into the parking lot, David exhaled slowly. I've been waiting almost 3 years. For today, I frowned. What do you mean? He looked toward the church windows. Your mother came to see me the week after Nathan asked her about changing her will. I stared. He asked her, several times. My stomach tightened. What did he want? David answered quietly. He wanted Margaret to transfer everything directly into Olivia's name. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He actually asked her that? David nodded. More than once. I sat down slowly. Mom never told me. Not once. David smiled sadly. She didn't want you carrying that burden while she was alive. What did she do? He opened his briefcase, removed a thick leather folder, then placed it gently on the table. This is why Nathan's announcement today doesn't worry me. I looked at the folder. What is it? David smiled. It's not the will. My heartbeat quickened. It's something much bigger. Before he could explain, his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His expression changed immediately. He answered, "Yes?" Several seconds passed. "I understand. I'll meet her there." He ended the call. I frowned. "What's wrong?" David slowly looked back at me. "Our meeting has to wait." "Why?" He quietly closed the folder. "Because someone just tried to enter your mother's house." A cold chill ran through my entire body. "Who?" David answered in a voice barely above a whisper. "Nathan." I didn't even remember grabbing my purse. One moment I was staring at David Harper. The next, we were hurrying across the church parking lot toward his car. "What happened?" I asked again. David kept his eyes on the road. "About 20 minutes ago, your mother's next-door neighbor called my office. She saw someone trying to enter the house." My heart pounded. Was it Nathan? We're about to find out. The drive felt endless. Outside, the gray afternoon sky matched the heaviness inside my chest. Mom's funeral flowers were still in the back seat of my car. I had planned to arrange them in her living room later that evening. Instead, I was racing home wondering why my brother-in-law couldn't even wait until the day was over. David finally spoke. "Claire, I need you to prepare yourself." "For what?" "Your mother believed this day might come." I turned toward him. "What do you mean?" He sighed. "Margaret wasn't afraid of dying. She was afraid that grief would make good people vulnerable to bad decisions." His words stayed with me. Mom hadn't been planning her funeral. She'd been planning for what came afterward. When we turned onto Maple Street, I immediately saw two unfamiliar vehicles parked outside Mom's house. Nathan's black SUV and Olivia's silver sedan. My stomach tightened. "They're already here." David nodded. "I expected that." The front door stood wide open. I ran inside. "Nathan." No answer. The house felt strangely quiet, almost sacred. Mom's favorite lavender candle still rested on the coffee table. Her reading glasses lay beside the half-finished crossword puzzle she'd never gotten to complete. Everything looked exactly as she'd left it, except every drawer in the living room cabinet had been opened. I hurried toward the hallway. One bedroom door was open, then another. Closet doors, storage boxes, even the linen cabinet. Someone had been searching. Not mourning, searching. I found Olivia standing inside Mom's bedroom. She looked horrified. "Claire, I swear, I didn't know." I looked past her. Nathan stood beside Mom's antique writing desk. Several folders lay scattered across the bed. He barely looked embarrassed. "What are you doing?" I asked quietly. He smiled. "Organizing." "No? You're searching." He shrugged. "Same thing." David walked into the room behind me. "I don't believe so." Nathan sighed dramatically. "David, you really enjoy making simple situations complicated." David calmly surveyed the room, then looked directly at Nathan. "Did Margaret authorize you to enter this property?" "I'm family." "That's not what I asked." Nathan hesitated. "No." David nodded. "Interesting." He took out a small notebook, made a brief note. Nathan frowned. "What are you writing?" "A timeline." Nathan laughed. "This is ridiculous. I'm helping Olivia." Olivia immediately shook her head. "No, I asked you to wait until tomorrow." He ignored her. Instead, he reached into one of the desk drawers again. My chest tightened. "Don't." He didn't stop. He removed several envelopes, flipped through them, then tossed them aside. I had never seen anyone treat Mom's belongings with such carelessness. I walked over, picked up one of the envelopes. It contained birthday cards I'd made when I was 9. Another held Father's Day letters Dad had written before he died. Nathan hadn't even looked, because none of it had monetary value. David quietly said, "Nathan, I strongly suggest you stop." Nathan folded his arms. "Or what?" David smiled politely. "Or you'll continue making mistakes." Nathan stepped away from the desk. "Fine. You obviously think I'm stealing." "I never used that word," David replied. Nathan laughed. "But you wanted everyone else to." Olivia suddenly spoke. Can we please go home? Nobody answered. She looked exhausted, as though she'd spent the entire day trying to keep two different worlds from colliding. Then something caught my attention. Mom's writing desk. The bottom drawer wasn't completely closed. Strange. Mom always pushed every drawer shut. Always. Even when she was too tired to stand. I slowly walked toward it. Nathan noticed. I already checked there. I wasn't asking. I gently pulled the drawer open. Inside, everything appeared ordinary, stationary, old stamps, pens, a recipe book. Nothing unusual. I started closing it, then paused. Something felt off. The drawer seemed shallower than I remembered. I reached inside, pressed lightly against the wooden bottom. It shifted, just slightly. David walked over. What is it? I think there's another compartment. Nathan immediately stepped forward. Move! David quietly raised one hand. No. Nathan stopped. I carefully lifted the false wooden panel. Beneath it lay a small black metal box. Locked. No larger than a hardcover novel. Everyone stared. Even Nathan looked surprised. David smiled. There it is. I blinked. You knew? I suspected. Mom never mentioned this. She wasn't supposed to. Nathan's voice became sharp. Open it! David ignored him completely. Instead, he looked at me. Claire, would you do the honors? I nodded. But it's locked. David reached into his briefcase, removed a tiny brass key attached to a faded blue ribbon. He placed it gently into my hand. Margaret gave me this 3 years ago. She said, Claire will know when she's ready. My fingers trembled. I inserted the key, turned it slowly. Click. The lock released. I opened the lid. Inside were 4 neatly organized items: a leather-bound journal, a flash drive, a thick sealed envelope, and another smaller key. Across the envelope, Mom had written in elegant handwriting, for Claire and Olivia, together. Nobody spoke. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside, there was another letter, different from the one we'd read earlier. Longer, much longer. I unfolded the first page. The opening sentence immediately stole my breath. If you're opening this, then someone ignored my final request to wait. My eyes slowly lifted toward Nathan. He looked away. I continued reading. Please don't be angry. I prepared this because I knew emotions would run high after my funeral. Grief has a way of making people hurry, and hurried decisions rarely lead to peaceful families. The next paragraph felt as though Mom were standing beside us. Claire, you always look for the best in people. Never lose that. But remember, trust isn't something you owe everyone. It's something people earn. Then, I reached the paragraph addressed to Olivia. My sweet Olivia. If you've allowed someone else's voice to become louder than your own, please stop and listen to your heart. Olivia's shoulders began shaking. She quietly wiped away tears. Nathan interrupted. Can we get to the important part? The room froze. I slowly lowered the letter. Even Olivia stared at him. What? He asked. I'm talking about the estate, David answered calmly. That was the important part. Nathan rolled his eyes. I meant the assets. David looked disappointed. No, you meant the money. Nathan stepped toward the bed. Enough games. He pointed at the metal box. Where's the will? David calmly smiled. You're assuming the will is what matters. Nathan frowned. Doesn't it? David shook his head. No. It stopped being the most important document 3 years ago. My heart skipped. What happened 3 years ago? David slowly reached into the box. He removed the leather journal. This. He handed it to me. It wasn't a diary. It was labeled Margaret Morgan, Estate Planning Journal. I opened the first page. Mom had dated every entry. The very first one read, Today, Nathan asked me to leave everything to Olivia. I looked up in disbelief. Nathan's face drained of color. Another page. Second meeting with Nathan. Again, he insists Claire doesn't understand finances. Another. The third request. He believes the house should be transferred immediately. Another. I've decided to change everything. My hands began shaking. Olivia whispered, He asked you? Nathan didn't answer. She looked at him again. You actually asked Mom for her house? Still, silence. David quietly spoke. Margaret began documenting every meeting. Every request, every conversation, every concern. I stared at the journal. There are hundreds of pages. Exactly. Then David looked directly at Nathan. You made one mistake. Nathan forced a smile. But what mistake? You assumed Margaret was simply an elderly woman. He paused. You forgot she spent 38 years teaching high school history. She documented everything. Nathan's confidence had completely disappeared. But then, he suddenly laughed. A strange, forced laugh. Fine, so she kept notes. That changes nothing. David slowly reached into the box one final time. He removed the flash drive, then smiled. I wouldn't be too certain. Nathan frowned. What is that? David looked toward me, then toward Olivia. Finally, he answered, it's your mother's video message. My heartbeat stopped. A video? David nodded. Recorded exactly 6 weeks before she passed away. He looked directly at Nathan, and she specifically asked that everyone watch it together. Nathan stared at the small flash drive. For the first time, he looked genuinely afraid. Nobody spoke. The tiny flash drive rested in David Harper's palm. It looked ordinary, cheap even. Yet somehow, everyone in the room knew it carried something that could change everything. Nathan tried to sound confident. A video? David nodded. Margaret recorded it 6 weeks before she passed. Nathan forced a laugh. So? David looked directly into his eyes. So she asked me to play it only if there was conflict after her funeral. Silence. Then David quietly added, she specifically mentioned your name. Nathan stopped smiling. Olivia stared at him. She mentioned Nathan, David answered honestly. Yes, her face drained of color. I had never seen my sister look so frightened. Not frightened of losing money, frightened of discovering something she didn't want to believe. David looked around the room. We should watch it together. Nathan immediately shook his head. There's no need. David smiled politely. I disagree. Nathan folded his arms. This is becoming theatrical. No, David answered. It's becoming truthful. I walked into Mom's living room. Her old television still sat where it always had. The same crocheted blanket rested neatly across the sofa. Her reading chair still faced the garden window. Nothing had changed, except she wasn't there anymore. David connected the flash drive. The screen remained black for several seconds. Then the video began. The image slowly came into focus. Mom sat in her favorite armchair. She looked thinner than I remembered. Her hair had become almost completely silver. The chemotherapy had taken much of her strength, but not her smile. She looked directly into the camera. Hello, my girls. My chest tightened immediately. It felt like she was speaking to us from the next room. She smiled softly. If you're watching this, then I'm probably already causing trouble. I laughed through my tears. Even now, she could make me smile. I hope that's not true, she continued. But David promised he'd only play this if something worried him. Her expression slowly became more serious. I trust David. If he's pressing play, I trust his judgment. Mom folded her hands in her lap. I've spent months deciding whether I should record this. I finally realized some things are easier to understand when they're spoken. She looked straight into the camera. Claire, my heart skipped. You've spent far too much time worrying about everyone else. I hope someday you learn that your own happiness matters too. Fresh tears rolled down my cheeks. Then she smiled again. Olivia, I know life became complicated. I know marriage asks people to compromise, but never compromise your character. Olivia covered her mouth. Her shoulders began shaking. Mom took a slow breath. Then, for the first time, her expression became deeply serious. If Nathan is standing in the room, everything stopped. Nathan's head snapped toward the television. He looked frozen. Mom continued calmly. Then I'd like him to listen carefully. No one moved. Even the grandfather clock seemed quieter. Nathan, when you first married Olivia, I truly believed you loved her. I still hope that's true. But over the past 3 years, I've noticed something. She paused. You've asked me more questions about my finances than about my health. Nathan looked away. Mom wasn't angry. She sounded disappointed. Every visit eventually became about paperwork. The house, bank accounts, retirement, my will. She smiled sadly. I counted. Nathan swallowed hard. You asked me 21 times whether I'd updated my estate. Olivia stared at him. 21? She whispered. Nathan didn't answer. Mom continued. I never told either of my daughters because I refused to let my illness become a battlefield. But I documented every conversation. David quietly looked toward the estate journal on the coffee table. Mom leaned slightly closer to the camera. I've lived long enough to recognize the difference between concern and curiosity. The first asks how you're feeling. The second asks what you'll leave behind. Nathan suddenly stood. This is ridiculous. He reached for the remote. David stepped between him and the television. I wouldn't. Nathan glared at him. You can't stop me. David answered calmly. I don't have to. Mom's voice filled the room again. If you're thinking about turning this off, Nathan froze. She smiled gently. You always become impatient when conversations stop going your way. Olivia looked at him, then back at the television. It was almost impossible to breathe. Mom reached beside her chair, lifted a thick blue binder. This contains every meeting, every email, every written request, every financial recommendation. She held it toward the camera. I've kept copies somewhere safe. Nathan whispered under his breath. Impossible. David quietly replied, No. Expected. Mom continued. I don't believe Nathan married my daughter for money. I refuse to believe that. But, she sighed, I do believe money slowly became more important to him than people. The room fell silent. She looked directly at the camera again. If I'm wrong, I sincerely hope Nathan forgives me. But if I'm right, I hope Olivia forgives herself. Olivia broke down completely. She buried her face in her hands. I didn't know, she whispered. I honestly didn't know. Nathan stepped toward her. Olivia. She backed away. No, I need to hear this. Mom smiled softly again. Now, let's talk about the house. Nathan immediately looked at the television. Hope returned to his face. You've probably spent days wondering who receives it. She chuckled. That's exactly why I changed everything. Nathan frowned. What? He whispered. Mom continued. The house isn't anyone's inheritance. It became part of something much larger. I looked toward David. He quietly nodded. The Morgan Family Legacy Trust. Mom smiled proudly. I created it 3 years ago. There will never be a fight over this home, because no one owns it. Nathan stared in disbelief. Mom explained. The trust protects this property. It can never be sold. Without unanimous approval from every trustee. She paused. And Nathan, you aren't one of them. Nathan's face turned completely white. Mom continued speaking. My trustees are my attorney, David Harper, my oldest friend, retired Judge Eleanor Foster, and, she smiled warmly, my daughters, both of us, together. I looked at Olivia. She looked just as shocked as I felt. We're both trustees? David quietly nodded. Exactly. Mom smiled. The trust has only one purpose, to keep this home in our family. As long as both of my daughters agree, she leaned back. No husband, no future spouse, no outside pressure, no shortcuts. Nathan suddenly laughed loudly, a desperate laugh. This doesn't matter. He looked toward David. There's still money. David calmly folded his hands. Is there? Nathan frowned. What does that mean? David walked toward the dining table, opened his briefcase, removed another thick folder. I've been waiting for the appropriate time. He looked toward both of us. Margaret instructed me to disclose this only after the video. He laid several financial statements across the table. Bank records, investment reports, trust documents, tax summaries. Nathan immediately leaned forward. His expression changed. Confusion, then disbelief, then panic. No, he whispered. This can't be right. Olivia looked down. What is it? David answered quietly. Margaret's investment accounts. There are more than I expected. I frowned. Mom never lived extravagantly. David smiled. Exactly. She invested. Patiently. For nearly 40 years. Nathan began flipping through the papers frantically. The balances. He looked stunned. This is, David finished the sentence, considerably more than the value of the house. I stared at the documents. Mom had quietly built a remarkable financial legacy without ever changing the way she lived. Nathan suddenly looked terrified. He wasn't seeing opportunity anymore. He was realizing something. He had never understood my mother at all. Then, Judge Eleanor Foster walked through the front door, 74 years old. Perfect posture, sharp eyes, still carrying herself like she had never left the courtroom. She smiled warmly at me, then at Olivia. "I'm sorry I'm late." She set her briefcase on the table, then turned toward Nathan. Her smile disappeared. "Mr. Brooks?" He swallowed. "You know who I am?" She nodded once. "I've known about you for almost 3 years." The room became completely silent. Then she opened her briefcase and removed another file nearly 3 inches thick. "I believe," she said calmly, "it's finally time we discuss the money that disappeared." Nathan's face lost every trace of color. No one spoke. Judge Eleanor Foster placed the thick file on Mom's dining room table, the same table where birthdays had been celebrated, homework had been finished, Christmas cookies had been decorated. Now, it held secrets none of us were prepared to hear. Nathan stared at the file, his lips parted. "What? What is that?" Judge Foster calmly removed her glasses. "It contains 3 years of evidence." Nathan laughed nervously. "Evidence? Against whom?" She looked directly into his eyes. "You." The room became completely silent. Olivia slowly turned toward her husband. "Nathan, what is she talking about?" He answered too quickly. "I have no idea." Judge Foster shook her head. "I was hoping you'd say that." She opened the folder. Inside were neatly organized bank statements, property records, loan documents, corporate filings, and dozens of printed emails. Claire, me, looked at David. "You knew?" He nodded quietly. "Margaret asked us to verify everything before telling either of you." Judge Foster spoke with the calm confidence of someone who had spent decades listening to lies. "Mr. Brooks, 2 years and 8 months ago, you refinanced 3 investment properties." Nathan remained silent. "You told Olivia they were profitable." He didn't answer. Judge Foster continued. "They weren't." She slid several papers across the table. Each property was operating at a significant loss. Olivia frowned. "No," Nathan said. Judge Foster interrupted gently. "I know what Nathan said. I'm showing you what the banks recorded." Nathan suddenly slammed one hand on the table. "This is private." Judge Foster didn't even flinch. "No, it's discoverable." She continued. "Then you borrowed against your personal residence." Silence. "Then against your commercial office." Silence. "Then against future rental income." Still silence. David quietly added, "When Margaret realized Nathan repeatedly asked about changing her estate, she became concerned. Not suspicious. Concerned. So she asked us one question." He looked toward me. "Could financial pressure explain this?" Judge Foster nodded. "So we investigated." Nathan looked furious. "You investigated me?" "No," she replied. "We investigated the facts." She opened another section of the file. By the time Margaret became ill, Mr. Brooks was carrying nearly $4 million in personal and business debt. Olivia's face went completely white. "What?" she whispered. Nathan closed his eyes. "I was going to fix it," he said quietly. Olivia stared at him. "You told me we were expanding." "I was." "You said we were making more money than ever." Nathan looked away. "I thought one project would save everything." Judge Foster slowly shook her head. "Instead, you borrowed more." She turned another page. There were 12 missed commercial loan payments, 3 tax liens, 2 pending civil lawsuits, and negotiations with creditors. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Nathan had spent years pretending to be successful, while quietly drowning. Then Judge Foster revealed something none of us expected. Margaret knew. Nathan looked up instantly. "What?" She didn't know every detail, but she knew enough. She understood that desperate people sometimes convince themselves that someone else's money will solve their problems. Nathan whispered, "I never wanted to hurt anyone." Judge Foster answered softly, "I believe that. You simply wanted the problem to disappear." Olivia slowly backed away from him. "You lied to me." He reached toward her. "I was protecting you." "No." she said through tears. You were protecting yourself. She began crying harder. I defended you. I argued with Claire. I missed time with Mom. Because every weekend you said we needed another client dinner, another investor meeting, another property tour. She shook her head. There were never meetings. Were there? Nathan couldn't answer. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then, he quietly sat down. He suddenly looked much older, not arrogant anymore, just exhausted. I failed, he whispered. I kept thinking one more deal would fix everything. Then another, and another. I couldn't admit I'd lost. Judge Foster nodded. That's the tragedy of pride. It asks people to keep digging, long after they've fallen into the hole. David looked toward Olivia. Your mother never hated Nathan. She pitied him. Both of us looked surprised. David smiled sadly. Margaret used to say, greed usually begins as fear. Fear of losing status. Fear of looking unsuccessful. Fear of admitting mistakes. Nathan lowered his head. Tears finally appeared. Real ones. I should have told you, he whispered to Olivia. The first year. She nodded. Yes. You should have. Just then, someone knocked gently on the front door. David checked his watch. I believe they're here. Who? I asked. The people Margaret expected might eventually need these records. 2 professionally dressed investigators entered. Not dramatic, not aggressive, just calm, respectful. One introduced herself. Good afternoon. I'm Special Investigator Karen Mitchell. The other handed Nathan a business card. We've been reviewing several financial complaints involving Brooks Development. Nathan slowly nodded. I figured this day would come. The investigators weren't there because of my mother. They were already investigating months before she passed. Mom's records simply completed part of the timeline. Judge Foster had quietly cooperated with them after receiving Margaret's written authorization. Everything had been done legally, patiently, carefully, exactly the way Mom wanted. Nathan stood without resisting. I'd like to cooperate. Investigator Mitchell nodded. That's your choice. He looked toward Olivia. I'm sorry, she cried quietly. I know. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't hatred either. Just heartbreak. Nathan looked toward me. I'm sorry, Claire. I judged you. I thought kindness meant weakness, I answered honestly. No, it meant Mom raised me differently. He lowered his eyes, then quietly walked out the front door with the investigators. No handcuffs, no shouting, no dramatic scene, just consequences. Sometimes, real life is quieter than revenge. The house felt strangely peaceful after they left, almost lighter, as though years of tension had finally disappeared. Olivia sat on the living room sofa, staring at Mom's empty chair. I missed so much, she whispered. I kept believing I'd have more time. I sat beside her. So did I. She began crying again. I can't remember our last real conversation. The last time we laughed. I kept thinking, next weekend. There wasn't another weekend. I reached over, held her hand, just as I'd done the morning Mom died. For the first time in years, she squeezed mine back. David quietly smiled. I think Margaret would like this part. Before leaving, Judge Foster handed each of us a small envelope. They're from your mother, private. She wanted you to read them alone. That evening, after everyone had gone, I sat on the back porch overlooking Mom's garden. The sun slowly disappeared beyond the trees. Everything smelled like spring rain. I finally opened my envelope. Inside, there was only one handwritten page. My Claire, if you're reading this, then you probably spent another day taking care of everyone except yourself. I laughed softly. She knew me too well. I hope one day you stop measuring your worth by how much you sacrifice. Love should never require you to disappear. You inherited something much greater than my savings. You inherited compassion. Protect it. The world always needs more people who choose kindness, especially when kindness isn't easy. One more thing. Please don't spend your future proving anyone wrong. Spend it building a life that makes you smile when nobody is watching. Love always. Mom. I folded the letter carefully, pressed it against my heart, then looked toward the old maple tree Dad planted the year Olivia was born. The wind gently moved its branches. For just a moment, I could almost hear Mom laughing inside the kitchen. Several months later, Olivia filed for divorce. Not because Nathan had become poor, because she'd finally realized honesty matters more than appearances. Nathan eventually accepted responsibility for his financial crimes. He cooperated fully. Several creditors agreed to settlements. His business closed. Years later, he wrote both of us a letter, not asking for money, not asking for forgiveness, simply thanking Mom, because the truth she forced him to face saved what remained of his life. The Morgan Family Legacy Trust stayed exactly as Mom designed it. We restored the old house together. Every Sunday, Olivia and I cooked dinner there. Our children played in the same backyard where we'd once chased butterflies. Mom's library books remained on the shelves. Dad's old rocking chair stayed on the porch. Nothing became a museum. The house remained alive, just as she wanted. One spring afternoon, nearly 2 years later, Olivia looked at me while planting roses in Mom's garden. "You know, I spent years thinking inheritance meant money." I smiled. So did Nathan. She laughed through tears. Mom would have laughed too. As the evening sun settled across the backyard, I finally understood what Mom had been trying to teach us all along. Money can disappear, houses can be sold, businesses can fail, but character, the way you love people, the way you show up when life becomes difficult, the way you choose compassion instead of bitterness, those are the only things that truly outlive us. Mom never left us the biggest inheritance. She left us the right one. And every time Olivia and I unlocked the front door together, we realized something priceless. The greatest thing our mother ever protected wasn't her wealth, it was her family.